Welcome to the Heart Pop Quilt tutorial. This is a project I've been working on in collaboration with Maywood Studio and using the yummy fabrics from the Operetta collection by Monique Jacobs for Maywood Studio. This project is beginner friendly and very quick, so let's make this adorable quilt together. You can go to the link that's in the description to download your free pattern and follow along. The pattern is very simple. It gives you the fabrics, the yardage required right underneath, and then it tells us how we need to cut the strips. I'm going to suggest a few things. So first of all, for the 6.5 inch strips, if you have the Go Cube 12 inch, this one is die number 1 is the 6.5 inch square. So you can actually use that. All right, as we begin with our cutting, I'm going to offer a little tip. Now, this is something that I learned this way too late. I knew to press my fabric. And because even this fabric here that was, folded pretty neatly, and it's not too wrinkly, right? It's tempting to just leave it as is. It's also very tempting to leave this fold here and not press it. But I'm going to suggest to you that you go ahead and press the whole thing open. If you like, you can even wash it and then press it afterwards. I did a very, very light press on my table. I really should bring up my ironing board and do that, but I'm going to show you something right there. All right, do you see that diagonal kind of bubble? If you were to lay this fabric flat with that bubble there, you're going to get strips that have that little bend where it was folded. I have my finger in between the fabrics like this, and I'm going to shift the fabric like that with my fingers. Until I don't see how there's one over here now? I've gone too far the other way, but I'm gonna shimmy it until it's nice and flat. And that is where you want to lay your fabric. Now, this was folded pretty well. There's only a tiny bit that I'll have to trim up to clean that edge. But that just gives you an idea of how to fold it so that you don't get any V in your fabric. All right, now what I did was I did exactly the same thing with the fabric. I shimmied it to get a second fold. That's going to make it a little bit easier for me to cut. You can use a regular ruler and rotary cutter to cut this. However, I think I am going to use my Stripology ruler because it'll be really quick. So I've got my fabric lined up here. I just want to make sure that when I put the ruler down that it's about even on the line. There we go. I'm going to use this line on the ruler to line up along the bottom edge of the fabric. And I'm going to shimmy the ruler over so that I can get a clean cut right here. And then I simply put it in the slot at the 0 and then go up. So now I need, according to the pattern, I'm going to need 20 6.5 by 6.5 squares and 8 5.5 by 5.5. So I'm going to go over to the 6 and slide into the 6.5 inch slot. I'll throw this part away. And then I've got my first 6.5 inch strip. Now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to line the edge up with the 0 Now, because it's 6.5, I will have to move it over. It's not as quick as if it was a smaller one, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to show you how to turn them into squares using this ruler. I'm going to put them so that the selvage is showing, because that's the larger part that I need to line up. All right, we're gonna test our ruler, because I'm doing 6 layers here, and I want to make sure that we can get through 6 layers using the Stripology ruler. Okay, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to pick a line on the ruler, and I'm going to line it up along the bottom edge of the fabric. And I'm going to scoot the 0 over so that we've got a little bit, you know what, I'm gonna just move it over just a slight amount. Yeah, like that. I like to keep selvages, so I'm gonna give myself a little extra room. Okay, close aside, and then I'm going to slide into the 6.5. Oops. That's 12. And that's 18. And now I've got some little extra strips that I'll just throw in my scrap bin. Okay, we're back over here. I'm going to need one more 6.5-inch strip. And then I'm going to need a 5.5-inch strip. And that is actually on the 12. And I think we should be able to get the rest of the cuts out of this, because I only need 2 6.5-inch squares, and then I can trim that down to 5.5. Again, I'm going to put this selvage side up and align it along a line on my mat, and then I'm going to align the ruler along the same line. I'm going to trim off the edge and set that aside, and then I'm going to do 6.5, and that will give us the 2 that we need to make 20. And then I am going to come over here again to the 12 and do a 5.5-inch cut. Of course, now I am going to have to trim these, so I'll show you how I do that. So we've got a clean edge over here. I'm going to line it up just like I would with a normal ruler, with a line and a line. And then I'm just going to come in here on the 5.5-inch slit and cut. And then I've got a perfect 5.5-inch square, and I can put that over in my scrap pile. So I'm going to keep cutting these up into 5.5-inch squares, and then I will come back. We need a 15.5-inch strip of fabric, and I don't have a 15.5-inch wide ruler, so I am going to make do with what I've got. I do have a ruler that's long enough, and I do have this ruler here. I could see that this line right here is the 15.5-inch line. So I'm going to switch this over here and move this one out of the way. If that makes sense in your brain. I'm going to make sure I'm on a line right here. I'm going to line up along here. I'm just, maybe we'll scooch down a little bit so I'm a little better. There we go. That's straight there, so I'm going to go ahead and cut 15.5 inches. There we go. And now I'm going to continue cutting the rest. I wanted to make sure that I got those done. I'm going to cut the two 15.5-inch squares. That took me about an hour to cut out all of the squares for this fabric. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take all of the 5.5-inch pieces and I'm going to put them in a separate pile. And I'm going to keep the 6.5-inch pieces. I'm also going to take the 15.5-inch squares and put those aside for later. Next, we are going to follow the instructions for making 2 at a time half square triangles. So it tells us that we need 12 with black and the darkest red, 8 with this red and this red, 7 with this red and this pink, and then we need 5 with this one and this one, and 4 with these two. So I'll take one of these, and this has got a nice light background, and we are going to take a ruler that reaches across the diagonal, which you need, let's see, you need about 9 inches. And I'm going to use this pen that will show up. It doesn't really matter what kind of pen you use, because this mark is actually going to, it's our cut line. So I'm going to go ahead and mark up the light side of our triangles and make a small pile with the colors together that we need. Okay, I've got all of the half square triangles marked. Let's move over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to make 2 at a time half square triangles. I've got a foot with a 1/4-inch guide set up on my machine, and I am just going to line up that 1/4-inch guide with the line on my square. These are larger squares, so if you feel the need to pin them together so they don't shift, go ahead and do that. And then I simply am going to turn it around and do the exact same thing and go down the other side. And that's how you make a 2 at a time half square triangle. One down, whole bunch to go. Now we have sewn our lines on either side. We are going to take a ruler and line it up along the drawn line. And then we have 2 half square triangles. I'm going to do all the rest and then we'll go over to the iron and press them open. Okay, now that we've got these all trimmed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the darker color on top. So this one has the black and red, so I'm going to put the black on top. I'm going to give it a press to set the seam, and then I am going to open it up, and I usually give it a little bit of a finger press just to open it up. And then you've got a half square triangle. You can also press the seam open, but this is how I learned. I learned to press to the dark side and nest the seams. I'm going to continue to do this to all of the half square triangles, and then I'll meet you over at the cutting table. I've got my stacks of half square triangles here, and now I'm looking at the instructions, and it tells me that they all need to be 5.5 by 5.5. So let's trim one up. It's helpful to have a ruler that has a 45-degree angle, and you simply line that 45-degree angle up with the half square triangle diagonal line as well. Now these are about 6 inches, so I am going to scooch this down so that it's about 5 3/4. And then I turn around and I lined this perfect edge up with the 5.5 inch mark right here on the ruler. Again, making sure that this diagonal line is straight. Take your time with this process because you want it to be as perfect as possible. And there we go. Now I'm going to continue with the rest of these half square triangles. I really do enjoy the Quilter Select ruler on the Quilter Select mat because I can actually adjust the ruler so that my hand is comfortable. I'm starting to have a little bit of trouble cutting today, but I think we will still be able to get through this. There you go. Another perfect 5.5 by 5.5 half square triangle. Hey, this is Tracy in editing mode. 2 kind of important things. So first off, if you've downloaded the Heart Pop pattern before today that this video dropped, you need to go download it again. I found an error in the pattern when I was working on this quilt, and we missed 2 half square triangles that you just need to make a separate color combination for. The second really important thing is that I actually completely messed up and didn't realize that I wasn't recording when I set up the units to go into each block. So I actually looked at the pattern, and for each one of these squares I laid out the corresponding units. On one of these design boards I actually have a whole stack of them, and so I took one board and one of these squares of 9 units, laid out the units, and then moved on to the next design board and then laid out this one and this one and so on and so on. And then I took those to my sewing machine and I sewed them together. I'm sorry that I missed that part, and you'll see me sewing them together now. This block is actually perfect for webbing. I I'm going to show you how I do it. I start with the middle block and place it on top of the left block. Really, I should say unit because they're not blocks yet. All right, put it back over here. Next, we work with this row, and you can see these are still all attached here and here. Oops, sorry. Okay, so again, I'm going to nest the seams here where they're attached and double check to make sure that it's going in the right direction. Match up that beginning of that seam. And then I hold here until it gets through. And then I'm going to catch this seam right here and make sure that it's nested properly and hold on to it until it goes through. And then I grab the end and make sure that that's all lined up. I've got it laid out on my design floor. Oh, I've got a little friend visiting. And I want to show you a little trick that I've got. Sorry for the glow of the lights, but I have little numbered pins that tell me which number the block is. So, got them all set up. And this is Mr. Willoughby, who is very curious. I'm going to pin the rows together and then bring these back upstairs so that I can sew them together. We got the rows sewn together, making sure that everything was right, and now I will sew the rows together. It'll be done before you know it. Okay, I'm trying to get a video in before I lose all of the daylight, but here she is. She's all done. Took me about 8 hours or so, and I'm a really slow sewer, so that should give you an idea of how long it took. And that included cutting it out, everything. So I think that was a really quick quilt. I'm absolutely in love with it. Now I need to decide how to quilt it. Do you have any ideas for me? So if you've made it through the video this far, I would love it if you would give me a like, subscribe if you're enjoying my content, and of course, drop a heart in the comments and send everybody a whole bunch of love this week, and happy Valentine's Day to everyone.